All right, so this is my visual reflection for week 5. All right, just to start with, I'm going to kind of go over The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Just kind of take some stuff that I got from that. I'm just going to do a quote. When we were told to love everybody, I thought that meant everybody. But no, it applied only to those who believed as we did, and did not apply to white people at all. This quote is kind of just like how James Baldwin thought and how the rest of the African Americans in America at this time felt. It's just kind of basically they didn't feel equal, obviously, as that was going around and everything that was happening. Everybody is raised of some correct, like some recollection to be like treat others as you would want to be treated, and that just wasn't the case for African Americans. So James is basically saying they felt like they're being taught the correct way to live, and everybody's being taught the correct way to live, but it wasn't applied to them. It didn't apply to white people, and that's basically white people took it out on us. And then just another quote from him that really stuck out is just kind of how his mindset was different, and he says, "The really terrible thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them." And I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love. That's just kind of like his whole. Back then, this was like an unheard of thought, and he's basically saying that got to accept everybody and treat everybody with respect, even when they don't respect you, kind of thing. And that was just kind of like an unheard of thing, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the teachings of Martin Luther King and later on Malcolm X, kind of, and just basic big time leaders of that time, where the whole nonviolent protesting, like his view was kind of like ahead of that time, and it kind of eventually caught up. Another thing that I thought was very interesting was this Malcolm X quote. We are African, and we happen to be in America. We are not American. We are a people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. We, our forefathers, weren't pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today, because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today. Now we've become awakened to some degree. We will begin to ask for things which they say are supposed for Americans. They look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. So basically, Malcolm X is saying that like we didn't ask to be over here. We were drug over here, and we didn't even get basic human rights when we were dragged over here and kidnapped over here. And he's saying that we have all of these constitutions and laws that would state that since we're Americans now, we're accepted in this, like accepted in the eyes of the government in writing, that we should be able to get these rights the same way that white people have, because it says in our constitution that everybody's equal, and we're finally starting to get treated equal. But as soon as we ask for these rights, he's basically saying that we were alienated and brutally beaten, and basically just white America looked at us as hostile and unfriendly when we asked for these basic rights. That really stuck out, because that's basically just how we were treated, and it's kind of sad. Lastly, through these readings was the Martin Luther King mountaintop speech. I hate to bombard with quotes, but this is kind of like the biggest part. I just wanted to do God's will, and He allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. He's basically just referring to that he kind of like saw ahead that, or he can see that whites and blacks will someday be able to get along and be equal and be able to coexist with each other. And he's saying that even though that he might die, which is ironic because he ended up dying right after this, that he sees us getting through, and we just have to keep pushing forward and treat people with kindness and love. And that was a big topic of discussion for throughout that part of history. Moving on to the visual stuff, the Black Panther Party. It was founded in Oakland, California by Huey Newton and Bob Seale, and then Eldridge Cleaver later on came in, but I'll talk about that later. But he was pretty big in that. Basically, was founded for blacks to fight back and fight against the oppressions of the whites that was happening in this time period, instead of just taking the beatings that we were getting. But the Black Panther symbol, which a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know was, well, I did kind of know, but I didn't know it was a symbol for the nature of how the Black Panther actually is, and the nature is to not attack first, but if something corners it or tries to attack it, it'll give it a chance, and if it keeps continuing, it's going to lash out. And so basically, these groups of African Americans in the Black Panther Party basically tried to stop and put an end to police brutality, and they would follow police around and make sure that police didn't do that. And they were armed, obviously. The Black Panther Party was armed, and they would basically follow cops around and make sure there was no police brutality happening. Obviously, this clashed with the government and everybody's views because it was a bunch of African Americans at the time who people were already afraid of. They had these armed weapons and could have violent intentions behind it, and that was a pretty scary thing. But not many people know that this party was also fighting capitalism, because they believed that capitalism was a system that we were dragged into that allowed the oppression of blacks. So obviously they wanted to fight capitalism, as they thought it was, and felt that it was bringing them into an unfair justice system where it kept the poor poor and the rich richer. Going off, Huey Newton was the visionary for everything that happened. He was like the biggest figure in the party. He was definitely the ringleader. Bobby Seale was the personality to people, and then Eldridge Cleaver connected the whites and blacks and gave the party a credible and intellectual feel. And yeah, this movement was big really because it started the kind of African American swagger that came with being black, and the whole movement that black is beautiful, but black is power, which is a huge thing. African Americans really started to embrace their culture and basically what it meant to be African American, and that really started to get embraced. And once again, that scared white America, but it really caught attention to the media, and they started using the media as an outlet. They started using their media popularity and coverage as a voice of protest. So now their word is getting all around the United States and not just California. Long story short, the FBI started harassing the party, and members that like grew to fame, like Fred Hampton, was assassinated by the FBI secretly, and they basically like raided his house and killed him. And he was a humongous figure later on in the Black Panther Party, and they killed him. And obviously that meant war, and there was a lot of fighting through that. And the FBI basically wanted to tear them down in secret, which is bad, just because they really weren't violating any laws or anything like that. So just for the sake of them being black, the FBI wanted to take them down, and they didn't want them to get ahead of steam for their cause. Another thing is Huey Newton. He was really big, and he became not just a man, but he was like an image for the party, which obviously made him targeted like everybody else. And then the last thing was Lorraine Hansberry. I just thought was interesting was during the Chicago's like highly segregated form during this time period. It was just amazing to see. It's amazing and inspiring just to see how she was able to fight racism through her different writings and her lifestyle. And I just thought that was big, because this is again, the segregated time is during a time period where her thought process was not common, nor was it like really, cheered upon, just because it was just so different. But looking at it now, where we are now, it's definitely one of the bigger ideals on why we're able to coexist with each other now. That's all I got.